Hello, I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar. Welcome to Superhero University on Batgirl of Burnside. Session number 1, Super Millennial Hipster Hero Expialadocious. Have a seat. Class is now in session. Hello and welcome to another Superhero University. I'm your superhero scholar Joshua Unruh, and today we are diving into a second relaunch of Batgirl called Batgirl of Burnside. Batgirl number 35, which was written by Brendan Fletcher and Cameron Stewart. Covers are done by Cameron Stewart. The internal art to the book is done by Babs Tarr. We'll talk about what I mean by a second reboot as we go forward, because we'll have to talk a little bit about Barbara's backstory and a little bit about her internal timeline, as well as what was going on in the publishing world. So it is my goal today to cover the first issue of Batgirl of Burnside. We are going to dive right in and talk about the sheer volume of new people and new places that you have to get to know on literally the first page or two of this comic, which should tell you something about the way that this book is going to manage itself. Things are going to keep happening. It's going to be pretty exciting, but I at least never felt like I had fallen off or didn't know what was going on. And I can actually use myself as an example here, whereas normally I am steeped in superhero stuff up to my eyeballs, and I guess I still am in that way. But I actually hadn't read anything with Barbara Gordon in it at all, let alone something where she was Batgirl, in several years. So diving back into this for me was actually brand new, and I did wonder if I should have recognized some of these people, but the fact that I didn't stop me from enjoying it, and I feel like that's another example. I'm going to go on about this as we continue, but that's another example of the kind of masterful superhero storytelling that goes on here. I always enjoy superhero stories where I'm not 100% sure if I should be recognizing this person from another issue, but it doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect my enjoyment of this one. And I feel like Batgirl does that in spades. As we must start with our players, let's start with Barbara Gordon herself. She is the daughter of Commissioner James Gordon, who everyone knows is Batman's main ally on the Gotham City Police Department. She is originally a longtime fangirl and eventual ally of Bruce Batman Wayne, and eventually becomes something of a serious love interest for Dick, aka Robin or Nightwing, Grayson. So she's been a part of the Bat family since 1967 when she debuted in, I believe, Detective Comics 359, the $1 million debut of Batgirl. Then, not very long after that, she appeared in the Batman 66 TV series in the third season, so right around 68, 69, and just became an instant big part of the Bat family. And if you remember, any of you who have seen Batman 66, if you remember at the beginning of that how Batman and Robin didn't know who she was and she would just show up and help out and then fade away, that was actually how she was handled for quite a while in the comic books. So that's how she's handled in the comics. It's how she's handled in her first TV appearance, and what I'm pretty sure is her second TV appearance as well. Barbara Gordon has been Batgirl on TV at least 3 different times. In Batman 66, in Batman the Animated Series, where again she started out as very much a Bat family adjacent and a mystery to Batman and Robin. And then again in Young Justice, where we don't really know very much about her. She never really got a ton of the spotlight on that show. And in fact, those of you who are familiar with Young Justice know that there was kind of a time jump between the 2 seasons, and we kind of miss her origin. Like, she goes from not being part of the team at all to being a full-fledged member of the team in that time jump. But nevertheless, Barbara Gordon, very famous character in superhero continuity, and like I say, has appeared as Batgirl on at least 3 different television series. So she appeared in literally hundreds of issues of comic books as Barbara Gordon or Batgirl between 1967 and 1988 when she was kind of unceremoniously retired in Batgirl Special #1. That was written by Barbara Kesel, and it's not a great issue of comics. And I want to say that in a way that doesn't cast shade on Barbara Kesel, because she did the best she could, from what I understand, with an editorial edict. She was handed the opportunity to write Batgirl. She had actually written Batgirl in other things, in backup stories and Detective Comics and things like that. And she was handed this opportunity to get a solo Batgirl special comic book that was going to be, extra big and have a lot of extra pages. She's handed this opportunity and then told, as part of the bundle, by the way, you're writing the last Batgirl story. In fact, that's the title of Batgirl Special #1, The Last Batgirl Story, because Barbara Gordon, through the process of that book, decides that she is going to retire as Batgirl. And, it's not a terrible story. It's not great, but again, when you are writing things under a deadline, when you're writing things sort of handed, this is what we want you to write with this character that we own, it's definitely a very workmanlike, and by that I mean competent and interesting to read story, but it really doesn't make all the sense that you would like it to for a character like Barbara Gordon, who has been so important to the Bat family over this time, and then she just kind of, without talking to anybody, decides that she's going to retire as Batgirl. In addition to Batgirl Special #1, aka The Last Batgirl Story, they made damn sure that she would remain retired as Batgirl in Alan Moore and Brian Boland's seminal Batman work, The Killing Joke. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about The Killing Joke, and then I'm going to skip right past it. Because at this stage in all our lives, the less I talk about certain comic book stories, the better. Even if they were fantastic at the time, even if they kind of hold up and are still interesting reads, they aren't really the thing that we want. I'll be more honest. They're not really the thing I want superhero comics to be anymore. They either darkened things up or made things more complicated than necessary, and The Killing Joke is definitely one of those things. So in The Killing Joke, Joker knocks on the door of James Gordon's home. Listen, spoiler warning for a story that came out in 1988, okay? The statute of limitations is up on The Killing Joke. So I'm going to spoil the heck out of it. So spoiler warning aside, in The Killing Joke, Barbara Gordon and James Gordon are having a nice time alone together, and there's a knock on the door, and Barbara answers it, and there's the Joker dressed like for a vacation, and he shoots her. And he shoots her right through the middle, and what we come to find out later is that the bullet severed her spine and rendered her a paraplegic. So again, not very long before this book, we had already had the Barbara decides to ride off into the sunset as Barbara Gordon retirement that we would want from something like superhero soap opera, where she can come back whenever she wants or whenever we think it would be interesting for her to come back. It doesn't fit perfectly with her character, but neither does it completely negate her importance to the Bat family. But then you have this story that is all about the men in her life. This is all about the Joker trying to use James Gordon to make Batman crazy, and she's just collateral damage. And it's not a great look. It wasn't a great look in 1988. It's not a great look for superhero comics now, especially we keep making reference to it. They just made a movie, of an animated film of The Killing Joke, which claimed to fix some of those problems, and from what I understand, the things they did to fix it made it 1,000 times worse. I say from what I understand because this comes under the heading of things I'm not going to watch because it'll just upset me. But at any rate, the bullet that Joker fires severs Barbara's spine and leaves her paralyzed from the waist down. Now, very shortly after that, another female writer named Kim Yale came to her husband, John Ostrander. You may know his name if you're at all a comic book fan. You may know him from Suicide Squad. By the way, I actually liked some of the Suicide Squad movie, and I really like Ostrander's original run on Suicide Squad back in the 80s. I highly recommend it. It's probably not a thing we'll seminar because it is pretty inside baseball even for me. Nevertheless, it's a great concept. And so you have Kim Yale, who is a writer herself and working on Suicide Squad with her husband, John Ostrander, and she didn't like the way that Barbara Gordon went out. And so between them, they introduce a new character, kind of an information broker type character, who feeds information to the Suicide Squad and to Amanda Waller, who is the government agent in charge of the Suicide Squad. And this character goes by the name as Oracle. And originally, it's a mystery identity. Nobody, not even we the readers, know who Oracle is. It's pretty cool. It's teased out for a little while. And then, in the end, it's revealed to be Barbara Gordon. She has taken her background in information technologies and library science and her eidetic memory and her commitment to justice, like to superheroing as a concept that drove her into the Batgirl costume in the first place. And she has turned that into a new way for her to assist the superhero, or in this case, the supervillain doing good, community. And she's doing that as Oracle. So as Oracle, wheelchair-bound paraplegic Barbara Gordon is offered a spot on the Suicide Squad as their sort of intel specialist. And then later, she's adopted by Denny O'Neil, who is a well-known, well-respected Batman writer turned editor. And I can actually say he's turned Bat editor, because for a long time, DC had sort of editorial houses, right? And so Denny O'Neil was the Bat editor. He made sure that all 5 or 6 or 8 or 100, because there were a lot of them sometimes, that all of those Bat books were on track. And there was a super editor, and, this is how it went. So Denny O'Neil is Bat editor extraordinaire. And when he said something for the Bat books, that's how it was going to go. And he did that sometimes to our good and sometimes to our bad. But one of the places he did it to our good was with Barbara Gordon, because he adopted this reinterpretation of her as Oracle whole cloth into the Bat family, so that now she's the one who is on Batman's headset telling him the information he needs to know about the situation. And really, that is a spot that really makes so much sense as a device in Batman books. To some extent, Robin was introduced to give Batman a person to talk to. And the idea that you would have somebody who was like a central hub of information for Batman, Robin, Nightwing, later other Batgirls that we'll talk about, anybody who is adjacent to the Bat family, that she would be coordinating all of their things, all of their operations. It just makes sense. And it gives somebody for any of them to talk to, because she's got like a wireless mic. It's a really impressive invention. It's one of those things where you wonder how they lived without it for so long, right? So at the point that Denny blesses Oracle, she is now a fixture. Like, she is very important, to the point where she is that person that Batman talks to in, I think, all of the Arkham games, certainly all of the Arkham games that I've played. Barbara Gordon appeared in another TV show as Oracle, a show called Birds of Prey, which we'll talk about some of the sort of source material for that here in a minute. And now when you watch superhero shows, there's always what Ned in Spider-Man Homecoming referred to as the guy in the chair. He's the guy who is in the headquarters looking at the computer and talking to the superhero and telling them the important facts that they need to solve the problem or find the bad guy or whatever. The original guy in the chair is Barbara Gordon. We only have her in that role because Kim Yale and John Ostrander decided to rehabilitate her as Oracle, and then Denny O'Neil blessed her back into the Bat family. So in addition to that, we also had miniseries written by another really great comic book writer named Chuck Dixon. He is a master of action, and he did a series of miniseries called Birds of Prey, starring Black Canary, who we will talk a lot more about when she shows up in this issue of the book, and Oracle. And so Oracle was like the information person, and Black Canary was the field agent, and they worked together that way. And again, you had a time when Oracle's identity was secret. Black Canary didn't know who she was helping, but she knew that it was good info. And over time, Black Canary finds out who Oracle is. They become very good friends, and they start putting together ad hoc all-female superhero teams. And the roster would rotate a little bit during these miniseries. But eventually, you also get a Birds of Prey ongoing series that was written by Chuck Dixon for a long time, and then later by Gail Simone, who you may remember from the Wonder Woman piece, where she's the one who said, if you want to stop a disaster, you call Superman. If you want to solve a mystery, you call Batman. If you want to stop a war, you call Wonder Woman. This is a woman who understands writing female characters most of the time. And she really sort of made her bones on Birds of Prey, writing Barbara Gordon as Oracle. It's also worth pointing out that it was during her tenure as Oracle that Barbara Gordon joined the Justice League of America. She joined the Justice League of America. There are a bunch of Bat-adjacent people, sidekicks, partners, various hangers-on, who can't even smell the Justice League from where they get to stay in the DC universe. But the woman who was fridged, for those of you who are familiar with that term, this is when something awful happens to a female character with the sole purpose of motivating male characters. She was fridged all these years ago when she was paralyzed, and then became this whole other character who, despite her infirmity, despite the fact that she is stuck in this chair, becomes so integral to Batman's operation that he nominates her for Justice League membership. He never nominated Dick Grayson for Justice League membership, just for contrast. So really, arguably, she's much more vital to the Bat family and to the DCU at large as Oracle than she ever had been as Batgirl, which is not to say that she wasn't really important as Batgirl, because many of us who grew up with Batman 66 will still talk about how much fun Yvonne Craig was. And I love her character on Batman the Animated Series. And, oh, you know what? I forgot. She was also Batgirl on The Batman, which is not my favorite Batman cartoon, but has a lot going for it. And one of the things it has going for it is the way the Bat family comes together. And it actually starts with Barbara instead of Dick. It's very interesting. So even though she has been Batgirl across various media, I would argue that she was more important, not just to the Bat family, but again, to the DC universe at large as Oracle. And I'm not sure how she ever would have been that important to the DCU as Batgirl. So the return of Barbara as Batgirl is a little mystifying, but you might remember we discussed during Wonder Woman Superhero University a publishing initiative by DC called the New 52. Now the New 52 is by and large admitted to be a giant failure. Barbara coming back as Batgirl was part of that initiative, and there's a point where you just go, New 52 is going to New 52, so what are you going to do? And move on and see how it worked or didn't work. But it is a really weird choice. It reduces the visibility of one of the few disabled superheroes. It undoes what were really strong and daring character choices. And I mean strong and daring both in the fiction by Barbara and outside of the fiction by the people who decided to do it. New 52 de-aged a bunch of people, and we come to realize that Barbara still had operated as Oracle, but apparently for a much shorter period of time, and that just kind of confuses the timeline. And again, I am a guy who should be able to follow this perfectly, and it's still, the New 52 condensed timeline just confuses me endlessly, and Barbara's time as Oracle exacerbates that. And arguably, there have been more interesting Batgirls. Helena Bertinelli, also known as the Huntress, was briefly Batgirl in a really fascinating turn of character during a big year-long Batman crossover called No Man's Land. Cassandra Cain also came out of No Man's Land and was another really fascinating take on Batgirl that carved out a much more specific niche in the Bat family. And then lastly, you have Stephanie Brown, who I don't particularly love as Batgirl. I liked her better as Robin, actually, but she starts out as a supervillain's daughter who's just trying to ruin that guy's plans because he's a deadbeat dad and she doesn't like him, becomes one of the Robins, Tim Drake, Robin number 3's on-again, off-again girlfriend, graduates to being Robin, is completely mistreated by DC Comics as a publisher, and then comes back as Batgirl in, frankly, one of the worst costumes that has appeared past 1999. That is saying something, because the New 52 really screwed up a lot of people's costumes, but Stephanie's is terrible. So arguably, there have been multiple Batgirls who were more interesting as Batgirl than Barbara was, or at the very least, are more interesting as Batgirl than Barbara was as Oracle. So my final point here with Barbara returning being a weird choice is that character inertia is a huge thing in superhero comics. I mean, I'm sure it is in soap operas and other long-running serialized things, but definitely I can point to multiple examples in superhero comics. They don't change much, these characters. And when they do change, especially if it's a big change, it either gets turned back pretty quickly, or it becomes ratified by other choices. And some of those ratifications tend to look like exactly what happened to Barbara. Like when they get repurposed to fill another role in the story, and then they get replaced by somebody else wearing their outfit. I mean, you can look at this in the Batman books. That is literally the thing that happened to Dick Grayson when he went off to become Nightwing. And suddenly, now it's okay for us to have multiple Robins. And I don't think anybody wants to put that genie back in the bottle, because as much as I love Dick Grayson as the first Robin, he's not my favorite Robin. I like him a lot. And he couldn't be the character he is now without his time as Robin, but he's not my favorite Robin. And it's the same thing where I love Barbara Gordon. But I mean, I read decades of comics with her as Oracle. I love her more as Oracle than I do as Batgirl by far. And part of what they did to make that happen was make her awesome as Oracle. But the other part of the thing that they did is they gave me equally or more compelling Batgirls. That kind of character inertia, both overcoming it and then it settling back in the new status quo, it does happen. And once it does happen through that whole change, repurpose, replacement, they tend to stick. And they tend to stick the longer that they go on. And listen, it's been a minute since The Killing Joke happened in 1988. Like, that is a lot of inertia. So, that's Batgirl. That's Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, making her triumphant return again. So, I feel like it's incumbent upon me to talk about Burnside as a character, because you might be wondering, those of you who realize Batman has been in constant publication for like 77 years now, you may be wondering, is this a part of Gotham that has been mentioned before and is just now getting reused and repurposed? And the answer is absolutely not. Burnside is brand new, created whole cloth, has never been mentioned before this issue of comics in 2014. However, Gotham City has a long history of being added to as necessary. At one point, even Catwoman had her own neighborhood that she patrolled, and it was at least important in her own book, if not in the Bat books as a whole. And now, for this new Batgirl, we needed a hip, trendy, gentrified, Bronx-esque borough. That's what we needed. So let's make one up and just pretend like it's been that way all the time and say something about how it's over the bridge to explain why Batman has never driven through Burnside before. Right? Pretty great. And for my money, it works amazingly. Because this book actually reads like it's for and about and written to 20-somethings. We'll get to this more as we talk about the book, but Millennial, or writing or marketing or whatever to millennials has been maligned deeply, and I've had enough of it, and I'm not even a millennial. But this is one of the few examples of when that's clearly what they were doing, and that I feel, again, I'm not a millennial myself, but knowing them and kind of being a writer who approaches these things of how do I make it feel like this thing, it really feels like they needed a place like Burnside to make this the Millennial Bat book. And they did a great job, and I don't think it would have worked as well if they hadn't created a Burnside. Next, we are introduced to Alicia Yeoh. Now, Alicia Yeoh is Barbara's previous roommate. You can kind of gather that from this book. She was created by Gail Simone in the last big Barbara Gordon reboot, the one that actually took her out of the wheelchair and put her back in the cape and cowl. Batgirl of Burnside being kind of a soft reboot after that one. And so she was created by Gail Simone to be Barbara's roommate in that run. She is a social justice warrior in the best way. She's very much an activist. You see her again in this issue being an activist. That's pretty amazing. I didn't read any of Gail Simone's Batgirl run. The New 52 really soured me and I just wasn't that interested in it. But from what I understand, she dated Barbara's psychopathic older adopted brother, James Jr., who also faded completely out of continuity for decades before making an appearance in the New 52. So weird. It's worth knowing that Alicia does not know Barbara's secret identity as Batgirl, even from when they were living together. And, interesting note, that I only knew because I was doing research on that run, Alicia is transgender. And she is one of the very first and most important transgender supporting characters in superhero comics. And the reason that I say it's really cool that I did not know that until I went and did some research on that run is because it doesn't define her. If I had not done that research, I would have been defining her as Barbara's socially conscious activist friend, not as Barbara's transgender friend. And apparently that was also very much a part of Gail's run at the time, that it was a long time before she felt like she could confide that in Barbara, and that Barbara responded with, open arms and open heart. And I gotta say, that's all pretty great. I really like that she is not just such a prominent transgender character, but that her transgenderness is not what defines her when she shows up in Barbara's life. Next, we are introduced to Francine Frankie Charles, the new roommate. And despite all implied retcons, this is her first appearance in a DC comic book. She has never appeared before now. And you would never know that reading this. They seamlessly interweave this new history between she and Barbara when they were both with physical therapists and kind of struggling through the fact that Barbara is a paraplegic and Frankie has muscular dystrophy. So they were both at the same physical therapist. They met, they bonded, really well handled. After the outcry over losing Barbara as a disabled superhero, it's very cool to see disability become a major part of her story going forward. Not just personally, but in the people around her. And as we will see, not in this first arc, but if we keep going, Francine sort of kind of comes to an Oracle-like place. It's a little spoilery, I apologize, but we'll come back to that later. It's worth pointing out here, though, that that's going to be part of Barbara's story going forward. Lastly, on this page, we also introduce our villain for this issue, Riot Black, and his weird information disseminating blackmail site, The Black Book. Clearly, he is not a good guy. Clearly, he doesn't like Alicia, who, even if we don't know, we know that she is Barbara's very good friend, so she must be a good person. And this guy sends her whatever gross picture is freaking her out, and she's working against him. We can definitely know right away that he's not a good guy. We will get that confirmed when he shows back up later. But I really liked him as a new and perfect capture of that zeitgeist of douchebag revenge pornographers and info fishers. It's pretty great. And he is an excellent opposite number villain for Barbara, which we'll talk more about when he gets introduced properly. But I love opposite number villains. They're one of my favorite things. Opposite number villains are when you take the hero and you twist them just a little bit. Just a little bit. And you get a villain that's an evil version of them, but not like a mustache twirling, cackling supervillain version of them. It could be them, but for one choice. I love those guys. Love them. So until we get to Black Canary, who I wanted to wait and introduce properly when we got to her in the beat breakdown, those are our players. And I know that there were a lot of people, my patrons included, who felt like they needed a primer on who all these people were. And the cool thing that I got to tell them is, no, most of them were really new. They were really new to me too. And it is cool to know the backstory of some of them, like Alicia and Barbara being roommates and stuff like that. But it's not necessary for this story. And again, if we go back to Wonder Woman as a bad example, it's really great that they also all have their own voices and we're sort of invested in them instantly. You all felt as though you should know more about them because of how multi-layered they were written and how well they bounced off of Barbara and each other. That feels like there's history there. And for the most part, there wasn't. Excellent writing right here in the first page or two of this book. So, moving kind of into the beat-by-beat breakdown so we can talk about what happens in this book. After we get Barbara moved in, we kind of get a next morning that is Barbara recovering from a party. And being a longtime reader of Barbara in her various incarnations, I gotta tell you that Party Babs was a weird move to me. It's not bad. It just really took me by surprise, which might have been the point for those of us who showed up thinking we knew this character. It might have been the point to wake us up and go, no, she's younger, she's hipper, she's doing something different. But honestly, overall, she's usually the responsible one. Part of that comes from her having to overcome her disability to recreate herself as Oracle. And I think part of it comes from her being the leader of Birds of Prey for so long. And I think part of it comes from Batman treating her like an equal, which he doesn't do to everybody in the Bat family. I mean, that varies some over time, but really once she gets adopted as the intelligence agent, the collator of intel for the Bat family, Batman treats her like an equal. And I think really Dick Grayson is the only other person he treats as an equal, and that is not always consistent. But again, with the de-aging, with the loss of time moving into the New 52, some amount of that stuff has gone away. Some amount of that character growth, some of that character maturation, for lack of a better term, isn't there anymore. And so she's still the responsible one in a lot of ways, but we also get to see what that looks like when she decides to just let loose. And let's be honest also, she left, from what I understand, again, researching the previous run, she left a very stable, comfortable living situation that she's still welcome at, as we heard from Alicia, and she left all that to move to this hipper, cooler, fun place. And I gotta tell you, I still remember what it was like to be in my 20s. If I'm in a place like that, I will take advantage of it. So I felt like it was a little bit out of character for the Barbara that exists in my head, but the Barbara that exists in my head isn't this new, youthful version of her. So it was surprising and a little jarring the first time, but the more I think about it, the more I really appreciate it. As a side note to that, though, and we haven't really been introduced to that in the story yet, but as a side note to Party Babs, the being all over some guy at the party also struck me as a little bit out of character. But in that case, it was because she and Dick have often been an item, especially during a big chunk of her time as Oracle, or at least a will they, won't they kind of item. And I was like, kind of wanting to come to his defense, like, but what about Dick Grayson? That said, I think he's supposedly dead at this time. I think they had faked his death at this time. So I'm not going to swoop in and defend Dick Grayson's honor. So as I say, a little bit unexpected, but also probably in a good way. Remind us that she's not that mature character we've come to know for a while. And if you're showing up with no concept of Barbara, you get to know something a little bit about her right there. She is a person prepared to have fun. She is a person prepared to not be super serious all the time, like most of the Bat family tends to be. So we have recovering Party Babs awakening to a text, or being awoken by a text. And this is an opportunity for me to say that I love how integrated devices and technology are to these characters' lives. And it's interesting that that is both on a personal and professional level. Because as we go on, we are going to see them all making tremendous use of their various devices, especially smartphones, which is a thing that has become a huge part of the way I run my life. And I am not a person who grew up with them or early adopted them like in their teens or preteens. I mean, it's become an integral part of my life, and I am very old. So I really enjoy that they are just never very far from their phones in a personal way, but also in a professional way. Frankie is a coder. That's her job. She writes code for Hook, which we'll talk more about here in a minute. But Hook is a great deal. It's DC Universe Tinder. That's a thing. That's very important to this first issue. Tinder is. And then, of course, also the devices that get stolen are kind of the initial MacGuffin. That's pretty great. I really like that move, and it instantly told me things about the way this story was going to work that made me happy with this idea of the Millennial Batgirl. Additionally to that, I really like the visual cues that go along with them. We can tell when she's reading an email versus when she's reading a text, and certainly part of that is from the tone of the information that she's getting, but it's also from the visuals. We know what emails look like, and that's what they give us floating over her head as she's reading them. We know what texts look like, and that's what it looks like floating over her head when she's reading it. And it struck me very much that it reminded me of the early parts of BBC's Sherlock Holmes reboot with Benedict Cumberbatch, the parts that weren't super stupid. When you see him like planning routes and things and the way that he organizes information in his head, it looks like Google, or it looks like Google Maps. And it just kind of struck me as like, oh yeah, of course, someone of this age who is digital native or nearly digital native would process information that way. That's going to continue to be a thing throughout this entire arc, and especially in this first issue. But I just had to say, I really appreciated it. That goes back to that we're making a book that is actually for millennials, that millennials will feel is for them. I am prepared to be told by millennials that that's pandering or that it doesn't work, because I'm not one. I may be getting set straight. But as an outsider who friendly looks in on millennials, this feels like an authentic, respectful, but mostly honest representation of them in media. And that's cool. It's not something everybody gets all the time. To get out of the awkwardness that she stumbles out to with Frankie and this guy who is her guest and all that stuff, Barbara volunteers sorta sideways to go get coffee. The coffee shop that she goes to is named Chiroptera. For those of you playing at home, this is a coffee shop named for the scientific bat family. I said family, and it is the order for all bats. Thank you to Susie for that. I appreciate that correction. So, Chiroptera is the order of all bats. That is the Latin word that would get attached to various species of bat. All bats, as far as I understand it, come under the heading of Chiroptera. And I have to tell you, I feel like that is a fantastic pun. Like, it makes sense that the hipper part of Gotham would capitalize on the Batman connection, but in a very sly manner. Like, we're not just going to call it Bat Coffee or something like that. They're gonna hip it up, and Chiroptera really does that for me. It reminds me of the 90s, early 2000s DC that is kind of my heyday, honestly. And it really feels like they're integrating not just on a story level, but that they're integrating the universe with details like brands of cola. That was a big one that ran through the DC comics in the 90s. Soda cola was everywhere. Big Belly Burger, that made the jump to the Arrow and Flash TV shows, started out as one of those 90s and early 2000s DC brands that let you know you were in the DC universe. Soon as somebody said, even if no one was in costume, but they're going into a Big Belly Burger or there's a Soda Cola billboard in the background, you're like, oh, I'm reading a DC book. And I think that's really cool as a concept. It's a thing I kind of miss. I really loved that Big Belly Burger, Soda Cola, the cities mattered. Well, like the cities had different flavors, kind of like Burnside does, through the 90s DC universe. And you see that again bubbling through this Batgirl book. And often you see it not just with this coffee shop, which would be very important to the target demographic, but also with the fake apps and websites. Hook is DC Tinder. Snapgrab is DC Snapchat. Pixtograph is DC Instagram. And that is all, I can tell you from a writer's perspective, excellent, unifying, world-building moves. We know something about this world because of those things. Now, all that said, I don't care about the bridge between Burnside and Gotham proper. Naming your coffee shop after a bat is possibly the single most dangerous thing you could do in any part of Gotham City, other than go to a museum opening on the 2nd of February, where they are showing practical jokes throughout history at the same time that they're showing off the Cat's Eye Diamond, at the same time that they are showing off the Wren's Heart Ruby or something. Like, naming your stuff after bats, not safe. Don't do it. Don't do that in Gotham City. Once she gets there, she makes her order in a very snarky way, which just, again, lets us know some things about her character from even the most basic dialogue. And we also see that somebody has been robbed. And we get just a one-panel taste of what Barbara's eidetic memory looks like, with another great visual cue, where everything that isn't her or the person she's talking to kind of gets turned into a vague blue, except for the most important part, which is popping out in red. In this case, someone who is stealing a tablet, and the tablet is popped out in red. I read an interview with some of the creators where they very specifically wanted to show what that would look like. They planned that ahead of time, and they call it her detective vision, which I think is pretty great. And right here we get just one panel of it so that we know what it is. Because here in a minute, it's going to be 2 pages worth of important, right? But right now, we're given a taste. We understand. And so we get to see that Barbara Gordon is still Batgirl. She figures out the route, again, with that detective vision, eidetic memory, does parkour across the rooftops, lands in front of the guy, tries to scare him in a way, I think, that isn't as effective without the bat costume on, and then proceeds to beat 9 shades of hell out of him and recover the stolen object. I think it's worth pointing out that in the process of that, she misses her coffee order. She just misses it. She's already paid, she made the order, and it's gone. And we know she has money trouble because we read her email from the bank. And I really like that angle. It's going to come up off and on again. It's not going to be a huge focus of what goes on with her, but it is always a thing looming in the background. And it kind of reminds me of the best Spider-Man stories that I really liked when Peter Parker was in college. And he was mostly stable, but always there at the end of the month. It was going to get a little wobbly. And you don't want to throw away $20 on coffees that you're not drinking. So it doesn't really come back. But I really liked that they took one panel in the process of her catching this guy to swing back around and point out that she is missing out on that opportunity. Now, there was one part of her taking this guy down that I thought was a little weird. The part where he says, "What are you, 14?" Just seems like a weird thing to say to her. And her response that she's legal. Again, I don't hate it as much as I'm a little mystified by it, and I wondered if anybody else had more robust thoughts on that conversation. So we see that crime fighting is not easily done on a wobbly hangover stomach, and a sickly Barbara is forced to return empty-handed to her apartment, where she runs into none other than Dinah Lance, aka the Black Canary. Now, we need to spend some time talking about Black Canary. For those of you who don't know much about the DC Universe, Black Canary is a longtime crime fighter with ties to the Justice Society of America, which is basically the World War II era JLA. She's been on the Justice League. As I've mentioned, she and Barbara were the core of the Birds of Prey for decades of comic books. She's one of the top martial artists in the DC Universe, and it's interesting that I mention that because in the DCU, that really matters. For instance, longtime Marvel readers, that's not really a conversation that comes up a lot with Marvel. You basically got Iron Fist and Shang-Chi, they're the best, and then everybody else is underneath that varying levels of extremely competent. In the DC Universe, it's a real big conversation about who is a better martial artist than who, and I don't think anybody would argue with Black Canary making the top 10, and very possibly making the top 5. She initially, in comics, got kind of famous. She'd been part of the JSA in a way, and part of the JLA at various times, but she really kind of hit her stride as a character, being Green Arrow's girlfriend, which is not really great, except that it gave her enough of a platform that once he was dead, she outgrew Ollie. While he was gone, she stepped up on the platform she got as his girlfriend and really grew into her own. And it was that space in between she and Ollie no longer being an item and Birds of Prey that she and Oracle came into contact, and we get kind of all of the rest of that really great stuff. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure of the details of their falling out. Again, there was a hard reboot with the New 52. Then there's a soft reboot for this Batgirl book. I do think that they had some issues working together in the Birds of Prey once Barbara was out of the control room setting and in the field. The part that's most important to take into this interaction is that whatever else they've done to the timeline, Barbara and Dinah are still the best of friends who have just recently had a falling out. And the reason that I bring that up is that longtime female friends, I do not want this to come across as a very sexist comment, but having had female friends with me and watching women that I'm very good friends with be friends with each other, the better the friends that women tend to be when they have a falling out, it sets a stage for trouble, right? And reading these two women's interaction feels very catty to me, but in a real world way, as opposed to kind of manufactured soap opera nonsense cattiness. And it sets up some strong character stuff for the future, especially with a really great line from Dinah where she says, "I swear, if this is some supervillain thing, you're helping me with it." I love that. Like, you learn a lot about their relationship just in this moment and in that one line. So Susie, one of my lovely patrons, says that she wants to talk more about the Black Canary character because she's having trouble liking Dinah in this book. And I think that's legitimate. I think that unreliable narrators are not as big a deal in comic books as they are in novels, just like they kind of aren't in movies and TV, because that's not the way us watching other people do stuff works in our head. But we do have to remember that this is a Barbara Gordon-focused story. She is the center around which everyone else revolves. And so you definitely have Dinah acting in a way that isn't necessarily out of character, but at the same time, she is serving a purpose in Barbara's story. And so it would be easy for that to kind of maybe get pushed over a line where she's very unlikable. It also hurts us that we don't know what they fell out over. Later, at the very end of this issue, there's going to be a development between her and Barbara that I think makes Dinah being this level of angry and disliking of Barbara, it makes it make a lot more sense. But at this point, I think we're supposed to read it as they've had a falling out. Dinah doesn't love that she has nowhere else to go but to Barbara, and is in an extremely stressful situation where her entire life has been destroyed. And for us, that's all informed. We don't get to see any of that. We don't see her discovering her apartment building burned down. We don't see her in the meetings with the insurance guy. We don't see that stress. We just get told about that stress because it's not a Black Canary story. I'm not saying you should love her, but I think with a little bit of realization of whose story this is and what role Dinah plays in it, it makes her a little more palatable, even if it doesn't necessarily make her more likable. So as Barbara and Dinah come upstairs, it's kind of weird and awkward and complicated. Barbara is bringing home strays to a place that she just moved into, which has to be weird for Frankie. And the guy is still there, and there's no coffee, and stuff is missing. And it becomes clear that more stuff than they thought was missing when Barbara can't find her computer. And you get a very, I don't want to say, it's hard to read in and know exactly how snarky it should be, but Frankie saying, I was having fun too. I'm not the boss of your stuff. Again, it feels like a really authentic situation. You just moved in here. You're already bringing people home. Do not accuse me of stuff happening with your computer. Roommates who like each other, trying to set boundaries, but in the middle of things going wrong. And let me shout out the art, because I have not talked enough about the art in this book. It's gorgeous. I talked a little bit about the visual cues, which is definitely part of it, but I love how well put together the art is in this book. The action is very fluid. The people feel like they're in motion the whole time. One of the biggest ways that this stands out for me is facial expressions, and you get really great ones here. Dinah hanging in the background, angry and snarky. Barbara's clearly worried. Like, we're going to find out more about her computer, but she is very concerned about it. Troy, that poor guy, is just hanging around confused, and Frankie is both in this like hurt and awkward space. Now, we do find out later Frankie's also hiding another little something, but she didn't need another little something to be hurt and awkward. This situation is weird. It's uncomfortable, and you can see that across the board just in the facial expressions. Really, really love it. Big fan of the art in this book. So going from this, Barbara immediately falls into detective mode. You get a 2-page spread showing Barbara's detective vision at work, alongside Frankie's regular memory and just knowing people better, and also rounding out the facts that they know from the party with social media. Again, we're integrating that technology, and I really, really like it because it just makes sense. I have myself, even as an old guy, gone, I don't remember that guy's name. I know where I was when I met him. I go find that event and find his picture. What do you know? He's tagged on there. I've done that myself as an old person. So seeing them combine Frankie's knowledge of her friends with Barbara's detective vision with social media, love it. Love it. And note again, as we get to know people around this room, that these feel like actual 20-somethings. These are the cool kids. There's a lot of tattoos. There is someone who is in an openly gay and forever monogamous relationship. These don't read like people in their 40s, and that is really good. I also appreciate not only the detective vision itself, but that this segues into Barbara talking to different people as a detective. She takes the facts she knows, she goes and asks salient questions, and she operates like a detective. That's the Bat Fam representing. Everybody who is in the Bat family should, to varying degrees and in different ways, act like a detective. And when they don't, it's a problem. There are some stories where you could just leave it out and not really talk about it, but it does my heart good to see somebody so integral to the Bat family operating as a detective. But in a very different way than Batman would, who's 10 years older than her. I also like how the conversations that she has, where she's nibbling around the edges of what happened, are these interlaced conversations between people that are in very different places in their lives. It's just very clever dialogue. I don't know that it works on the page as well as I would like, but I can picture how it would work in a TV show or movie, and it goes a long way. It also cleverly reintroduces Riot Black. We may have forgot him from page 1, but let's go ahead and reintroduce him now because he's the big bad of this issue and kind of the MacGuffin setup for this whole first arc. Hilariously, Barbara decides that she has to join Hook, DC's Tinder, and I have to tell you, I am legitimately delighted by Frankie's excitement to both give Barbara a makeover and to see her friend using the app that Frankie works on. Like, as a writer, I know how excited I get when one of my friends tells me unsolicited, without me having to bug them, that they read something I wrote and really enjoyed it. I know that kind of thrill that gives me. And I know from my friends that do coding of some sort, of various types, for their job, that they have a similar thrill when somebody unexpectedly wants to use a piece of technology that they've created. And so watching Frankie as a girl get excited about the makeover and as a coder get excited about her friend using the app is just cute as hell. I really appreciate it. These character beats are so real and so strong without beating it to death. In comparison to Wonder Woman Year One, where we spent a lot of time not being entirely sure how people felt about other people or why they were doing things, we organically know why people are doing things here and what their relationships are to each other and how they're evolving just from this conversation, these facial expressions, and what goes on. I think that includes Dinah's snarky disdain for the whole enterprise. Because Dinah is kind of punk rock. Like, that's not a thing that's always been a part of her character, but it's a thing that they bring up in this version of her and going forward. And she's kind of punk rock, and she's not going to be into makeovers, like, at all. The idea that kind of vaguely socially awkward Barbara would use this dating app, she has got to be thinking that's hilarious. And note that because Frankie's there, Barbara can't say anything to her about how this is part of her investigation into the missing devices. And it leaves Barbara in a place where she says she's going to need new clothes. I love as a scene change because anyone in that room might have been thinking she was talking about dating, but we turn the page and go into a full-page costume making montage. Now, let me save you the time that I did Googling. That song is not real, but I want it to be. I'm actually kind of annoyed that I can't listen to the song that Barbara is using for inspiration on this amazing costume. As a side note to that, I'll point out that I'm able to know what made-up song she's listening to because we're seeing that integration of technology into her regular life again. About this costume. I super love it. Ethan, one of my treasured patrons and good friend of mine, will remember from before this book came out how excited I was about this costume. Because superhero costumes are a thing that are really near and dear to my heart. I have a lot of feelings about them. But superhero costumes that are also fashion forward are a thing I can get really excited about because it just doesn't happen that often. Or it happened when they first came out and then that's the thing that they wear and it just stops changing. And in this case, it really shows how much effort both Cameron Stewart and Babs Tarr went into to put this costume together and make it really, like I say, very fashion forward, very much a thing that a 20-something would wear, while also being very functional. She can clearly fight crime in this thing. There's even a callback that I really like to early Batgirl stuff before things were quite as liberated as they ought to be. She used to carry a purse. And she would have some bat-themed makeup weapons in it. But she had this yellow purse that she carried. It went away pretty fast. But I like that it's kind of back in that leg pouch. But not in a stupid way. Like in a way that wouldn't keep her from flipping over buildings and kicking dudes in the face. Incidentally, in the show notes, I am going to link you to an article where Babs Tarr talks about the process that she and Cameron Stewart went through to put this costume together. And it also has kind of a close-up of the costume that will let you see different bits of it and how it isn't just body paint, which so many superhero costumes could be. It's a layered, functioning piece of outerwear. And that's pretty great. And it still looks super fresh and fashion-forward, even though it's already 3 years old. And she finishes up making it just in time for Brad to find her on hook. Brad meet Batgirl. I like this scene a lot. I like that Barbara used herself as bait and then just stood him up. Didn't even try to smooth that over, just straight stood him up and then appeared as Batgirl. And we get a really cool line here from Brad where he says, "I thought the freak stayed across the river." It's mostly a throwaway line, right? Except we're staking off this section of Gotham as Batgirl's turf. It lets us know we're close, but not that close. And it lets those of us who worry about how these universes fit together stop wondering when Batman or Robin or Nightwing are going to show up to bail her out or to get in her way. Batgirl takes Brad out very easily. She's obviously super capable. She's also scary as hell in this scene, but in a really different way than Batman would be or Damian Wayne as Robin would be. The coding on the fly is very impressive, and her turning her total recall around as a weapon is scary. I'll forget all of these details about you that I clearly just memorized. Don't make me come after you, Brad. Like, that's scary in a way that a 6-foot bat monster just isn't ever going to be. I also really like how along the way she discovers something seemingly unbelievable about Riot Black and his computer brain, but she doesn't even blink or dwell on it. This is the DCU. It's weird here. Worse, it's Gotham. It's weird and super dangerous. Oh, he's got a computer in his brain? Obviously. It must be Tuesday. I really like that bit. Again, it's all one page or a page and a half of stuff, but you just get so much character along the way in this. Not just character of the people in the scene, but the character of the book and of the city. It's excellent. We cut from there to the return of the Black Book and also Alacia. I don't know if any of you guys noticed, but that's Alacia, who is picketing the Black Book relaunch party. There she is doing her activist work and carrying a sign, which I find delightful because Quiet Riot is a great sign. We cut to inside the party and we get Riot Black's first real introduction. And let me tell you, I find him to be the perfect douche bro party boy. He's everything we hate about that archetype rolled into one place. He is like the surprise pregnancy that happens if Alien from Spring Breakers somehow managed to hook up with the tire fire that was the year of our Lord 2016 at a rave. They get together, they have a baby, and it looks like Riot Black. Let's go down the list. I find his shirt that says "Too Epic to Fail" so annoying that I want to punch a fictional character in his non-existent nose. I love that he's wearing a giant hat that says "Dope" just to make sure you understand how dope he is. He is DJing. You may have just heard me eye roll over the microphone. Seriously. He speaks in hashtags. I don't even know what that sounds like, but he does it. And he refers to himself as #God, like the douchiest version of Kanye West ever. And let me tell you something, that's saying a thing, because Kanye's a pretty douchey version of himself. And then, of course, he's just super sexist. He's egging people on to grab each other in inappropriate ways, get pictures that are of dirty bits, and then share them to him, whether the person who owns the dirty bits likes it or not. And you especially get it when he is interacting with Batgirl. And we get a really solid Batgirl entrance here, along with a pretty good entrance line. Speaking of asses, yours is about to get kicked. It's not great, but it covers the moment, and it sounds like a thing that Barbara Gordon would actually say, thinking it makes her sound awesome, when it really just makes her sound okay. She's a little square, right? She immediately springs into action, and I like that Black is defending himself well, but at the same time, he is never in charge of this fight. There is no way this douche nozzle is going to physically beat Batgirl in a hand-to-hand combat. It's just not going to happen. We also see with one of her shots to his face, his weird computer eye that shows evidence of the computer brain that we were just told about and that Barbara believed instantly. So now we've got a little evidence of that beat. After she has clearly beaten him with her physicality, Batgirl pulls off the coup de grace with her brain. She offers him bait that she knows his pathology can't resist, which is a great Gotham City supervillain beat. Batman beats his villains with their pathology as often as he beats them any other way. And here we see Batgirl has learned that lesson and is doing it. She offers Riot Black a piece of information he can't get anywhere else, her secret identity. And then she tricks him and beats him with the power of coding and a smartphone. And I don't know anything that would better fit in this book in that moment than the idea that Batgirl wins with computer coding, social media, and a smartphone. And in that moment, the Black Book is closed. You turn the page, though, and you find out that winning as Batgirl is not necessarily winning as Barbara. This harkens back to that Peter Parker stuff that I love so much. Spider-Man can win. Peter Parker does not get to win. Not very often. And I think we're going to see that more and more for Barbara, not in that Parker hard luck way, but that things just don't work out for her in both of her lives at the same time. She recovers her laptop, but it doesn't have any of her files, and we realize that those missing files are going to set up the big conflict for the rest of this arc, or at least they're going to be part of the MacGuffin for the big conflict for the rest of this arc on Barbara's side. Now, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, so we'll talk about this more as it develops. But remember, we are introduced in this moment to not one, but two big conflicts that are going to go through the next 5 issues of this book. One for Barbara and one for Batgirl. Now, they overlap, okay? There's a Venn diagram here where they overlap. But as you read, we'll discover that they overlap quite a lot more than they sound like they do in this moment. And that is some really clever plotting. In this moment, we also have Frankie confide in Barbara the thing that she was worried about Barbara knowing. What I really love about this is that Frankie, who Barbara has apparently known as a lesbian, comes out as bisexual. And she says that she doesn't want Barbara to think less of her. But it's never part of the conversation that Barbara might think less of her because she's a lesbian or because she's bisexual. It has nothing to do with her queerness at all. She doesn't want Barbara to think less of her because Barbara and Troy were kind of into each other at the beginning of the night. But by the end of the night, Frankie and Troy were kind of into each other. That should not be revolutionary. And yet, it is. You do not see that deft handling of things like lesbianism and bisexuality or female relationships. You don't see that kind of deft handling of those things very often. We should, and we just don't. Frankie exits because Dinah comes in. And here we see another character trait of Babs that I love. So Barbara is honest to a fault when she tells Dinah that Barbara had, without Dinah's permission, stored her Batgirl stuff in Dinah's apartment while Barbara moved out to Burnside. And that it's possible a prototype of remote controlling her gadgets is what set off the incendiary device that burned Dinah's life to the ground. Barbara could have hidden this information. She didn't have to tell Dinah. It does not actually get her anything to tell Dinah this information. In fact, it separates them more. That anger and estrangement that Dinah had coming into this solidifies in this moment, at least for now, into hatred. She says, I do hate you because it's your fault my life's burned to the ground. And it's not just your fault. It's your fault because you invaded my privacy by storing your stuff at my house without asking. And then your reckless irresponsibility got your computer stolen and some guy poked at it until it burned my life down. That's a big moment between them. And so we've kind of been working up to that animosity, but this is the moment that it really becomes the thing we're going to be working against between Dinah and Barbara for the rest of this arc. And just when we don't think we can have enough interpersonal drama, Barbara gets a text, and it leaves us with our cliffhanger. Somebody knows that Barbara is Batgirl. And again, I'm going to keep away from serious spoilers, but this very cleverly sets up the conflict of the Batgirl side of the arc with subtlety. You think the thing at stake is identity, and you're right, but it's not only or even primarily the secret identity. It is literally every aspect of Barbara's identity as both Barbara Gordon and Batgirl that is going to come into conflict. And we set it up in this moment with the most superhero of tropes. Somebody knows my secret. That is some masterful stuff. All right, and that brings us to the wrap-up of this first session of Batgirl of Burnside. And I gotta tell you, I find this to be an absolutely mind-blowing first issue. It is so well put together that I just get excited about it as a reader, as a writer, all over the place. Let's remember, this is effectively an origin issue. It introduces a whole new place, a whole new supporting cast, and a whole new arc, and it never stops moving. Something interesting is always happening on every page. And part of that is the writing, and part of that is the art. Because I remind you, the page of her making her new costume teases bits of the new costume without giving it away. And it's really interesting and exciting, even though it's a page of her basically painting and sewing. And that's just one example. Something interesting is always happening. And it's not always superheroing. Sometimes it's interpersonal or just personal. And a lot of times, it's all three of these things. It's interpersonal, it's personal, it's superheroing. In an origin issue where they had to tell us all kinds of new stuff about all kinds of new people while telling an actual story. This is what every single superhero origin issue should look like. And I want to contrast it with the first issue of Wonder Woman Year One. Or honestly, any issue of Wonder Woman Year One. Or, painfully honestly, any 3 issues of Wonder Woman Year One. When we went over Wonder Woman Year One in the first Superhero University, there were a lot of things to like about that story and a lot of things to like about different characters. The pacing was not one of the things to like. I don't know that there are 3 scenes in that book that have as much character as 1 or 2 panels from this book. We wondered what people were feeling a lot of the time. We wondered why they were doing things. We certainly never had a panel where everybody told you in their own character-specific way why that scene was super awkward. This is finely crafted, always fraught, but never a moment to breathe superhero storytelling. And it is going to continue this way for several more issues. And I'm really excited to talk to you all about it. And we'll see you back here next time for part 2 of Batgirl of Burnside. Thanks. Superhero University is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, please leave the show a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to help others discover the show. Keep up with Pulp Diction news by following our host on Twitter @Joshua Unruh. Or find us at facebook.com/pulpdictionproductions.